we're all born atheists? Like, we don't have a built-in belief?
Deny or don't believe that there could be a higher power or some kind of metaphysical godlike being out there.
When I kind of put two and two together and reasoned that there was no Santa Claus.
That it's not possible to have a moral view or a moral standard without religion, that's kind of where all that comes from.
Like, we can't say for sure that, gorillas have a gorilla Jesus, or,
Okay, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Erik Rosenblatt, and this is a bit of a departure from the usual format. It's more of an interview. So this is going to actually be the first in a series of episodes about religion, or the lack thereof. And we'll figured I'd start with the topic of atheism. And my guest today is going to be Casey Rochefort.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. Where's the rangy, handsome, bald guy?
And so, you're joining us today on behalf of, you're an atheist, and I thought I'd ask you some questions about that, because I think the topic of religion is a fascinating one to me for a very long time, and I'm sure it has been for you as well.
Yeah, well, tricky thing about that is atheism is a diehard cult, and we can't talk about it, or otherwise I'll have to kill you and eat babies and stuff like that. So, or I could just dispel a lot of the rumors like that are running abound.
We'll get to that soon. There are definitely a lot of rumors, and hopefully we can kind of bring a little clarity to the subject. So I'll start by asking, have you always been an atheist?
That's an interesting philosophical question, because like, the way I see it, we're all born atheists. Like, we don't have a built-in belief. But as far as most of my upbringing, I was baptized and raised and adopted through Catholic means, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Catholic Community Services was my adoption agency. Went to a Catholic school, St. Pat's, Holy Cross Church, all that stuff, where my dad was a singer. So, like, I was in the life, and I ran through the most of the usual rigmarole that you do, like First Communion and reconciliation and all that stuff. But as time wore on, I started asking more and more questions and getting less and less satisfactory answers, and that started to get me thinking critically.
Yeah, and that sort of kind of covers another question I had. But first off, so you were at one point in time basically participating in the Catholic faith,
right? Yeah.
And was that something that you basically believed or followed at the time, when in your youth, let's say?
Yeah, to the extent that a child can really grasp a concept as deep as metaphysics can be. Because like, children have really imaginative brains. I was certainly no stranger to having a good imagination, and it was easy for me to grasp some of the concepts early in life. And then as I got older, those concepts became harder and harder to grasp. It's just like, when I kind of put two and two together and reasoned that there was no Santa Claus.
Yeah, yeah.
Same basic concept was brewing with religion.
So what was there a point when you kind of conclusively arrived at the idea that atheism or that philosophy was correct, or the way that you wanted to go in your life?
I don't know if there's a moment I can point to, but there was a definite like evolution of that thought. Like I identified as Catholic for most of my childhood, and then probably around middle school, I'd say, I started throwing around the word agnostic, and my mom didn't like that much. It was kind of met with a little bit of like resistance, and so I didn't really feel comfortable discussing religion anymore after that at home. And like I just started thinking like, well, all these other religions, either they're all wrong or they've all got something in common, and it seems more like they've all got something in common to me. And so I started looking at ways that they were all alike, and I just started to, I guess it's pantheism or something, where you think like everything's kind of right or whatever. That's
Yeah.
first way I shifted, and then I kind of went on to that agnostic side. And agnosticism isn't like atheism necessarily. It's basically just acknowledging we don't know. Like it could go either way.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, my understanding is atheism is essentially just the lack of religious philosophy, or I guess you don't follow a particular religious philosophy, hence the name atheism.
Right.
So that, I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean you deny or don't believe that there could be a higher power or some kind of metaphysical godlike being out there.
Right. Well, it's hard to answer that in a way that people really understand, but yes, as an atheist, you absolutely cannot say for sure that there is not a God, or there's not a higher power, or there's not aliens, or there's not unicorns or fairies.
Yeah.
The point I'm getting at here is the burden of proof fallacy is often at play when people of religion are arguing with atheists. They say, well, you can't disprove God. And they're absolutely right. You can't prove a negative. You can't, like the burden of proof fallacy basically says that the person making the more fantastical claim is the one who needs to provide their proof.
Well, the burden of proof in that sense is the burden of proof is always on the active party. So if you're just passively, you say, I don't know, I don't have a belief. Well, you have nothing to prove. But the person saying, this is the way things are, or this is what you should believe, those are the people who the burden of proof lies on.
Yeah.
It rests on them.
Yeah. So basically that's, in a nutshell, like I can't say for sure, but there's this kind of gradient of atheism where there's some people who believe it more adamantly than others. Like there's some people that are like, I know for a fact there's no God. And well, it's like, how did you really arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, you can't really prove that.
Yeah.
Well, it is definitely a spectrum. I think like many philosophical views, there's a pretty broad system of understanding or way of thinking.
Yeah.
A lot of people that think very different things.
I think the defining feature is that atheists live their life as if there's no God. Like they act accordingly. Basically, they're when they do good deeds, it's not because they want some reward in the afterlife. When they avoid killing people, it's not because they're fearing punitive measures like hell. They're doing it because of morality, you know, in
Yeah.
both cases, you know, it's
Well,
basic human morality.
and that's interesting. I've heard this a few times, um, that that it's not possible to have a moral view or moral standard without religion. That's kind of where all that comes from. And what do you think about that statement?
Uh, it's absolutely true that a lot of morality in our society as a whole does stem from religion. Now that's you know, you can't say that that's the only place where morality comes from, though. It's just one place. You know,
Sure.
it's like if I want a recipe for banana bread, it's not just in one recipe book. I could get it from multiple.
And there's different types of banana bread you could be making too,
That's
with
right.
nuts or without nuts, or
Walnuts, yeah, like
yeah. And well, exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
and you know, to go a little further on that, I mean, there have been studies that show there's morality in the animal kingdom, and like we can't say for sure that, you know, gorillas have a gorilla Jesus, or you know, like
That might need to be an episode, actually. That would be interesting.
yeah. So I mean, basically, it's like we kind of act under the assumption that religion is kind of unique to the human species. So why is it that there's evidence of morality in other animals?
Well, yeah, and then it brings up the idea of chicken and egg kind of thing. Like, did morality come from religion, or did religions base their philosophy around this sort of kind of innate morality that we possess as humans, or as higher level species, I guess, that reason?
Yeah, I believe it's absolutely the latter. I think religion filled a need um, long ago, where there was probably a little bit of a learning curve to, you know, forming the earliest societies and civilizations, where some people were prone to just kind of do what they want without, um, you know, treating others as they would want to be treated, which is kind of like that, the golden rule or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was probably like this uh, need to get that message out to people in the form of, you know, like the only way they really had to disseminate information was like storytelling. And I think that's where a lot of religion was kind of built from, is basically taking something important like morality and finding a way to communicate it in a digestible way.
Sure. Well, and also, I think some religions, or maybe, I guess, portions of various religions, especially the older ones. I'm not going to count Scientology because that's too new. But some of the older ones some of the components attempted to explain things that couldn't be explained with the understanding that people had at the time. Um, Obviously, like, we're very curious people, and we want to know why things happen, and there's always tales of why the thunder storms happen the way they do, or the lights in the sky and weird weather patterns and eclipses and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think that's a good point, that the origins of religions, I think they had a value. Maybe they still do, in terms of social cohesion and personal comfort, especially in adverse times. I think it can be a benefit, regardless of how you feel about the religion. I think they do still serve some purpose in that regard. What do you think about that?
Uh, You mean is religion still like kind of an important part of our infrastructure, or?
Well, maybe is it still relevant today in the world that we have with the scientific understanding we have and technological advancements and moderate societal advancements? Do you think it's really relevant?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, no, I don't think it is relevant anymore. We're seeing a huge decline actually in religiosity. Um, more and more people are claiming this, secular realm of agnosticism or atheism or just who cares or whatever.
Or general spirituality. I think that's
Yeah, yeah.
still, there's a
And,
lot of people that are deeply spiritual but don't follow a religion, like a titled religion.
yeah, and I consider myself a spiritual atheist, which I can go into a little more later, but
No,
um,
maybe you should towards the end or something, because I think people would benefit from knowing what that means.
yeah,
Uh,
it sounds counterintuitive at first, but um,
well, it does, depending on how your interpretation of what you believe the word atheism actually means. But
yeah.
yeah,
But getting back to your question, as to whether it's relevant or not, no, I don't think so. I think we've, as a society, we've kind of pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps at this point, and we can operate without religion telling us what's right and wrong. We have laws and social mores and all this stuff now that's in place, and we already basically operate as if there's no God. It's just that there's a large proportion of people who happen to believe in God, and most of the time that doesn't really hurt. So it's probably not going to go anywhere, because in the case of evolution, things that evolve out of us uh, tend to do so at a very slow rate. Like if things aren't needed anymore, there's no urgency to remove them.
that
Um,
makes sense.
and that's why we have these vestigial organs that don't really do anything anymore, but we can live without them. Like, oh, you don't really need your tonsils or your spleen or your appendix or whatever. Like, they used to do something really important way back in the day. Now they don't. They're still here because it's not hurting
Yeah.
anything, so we'll just leave it there. I mean, that's basically the case with religion. I think that we're going to see is it'll decline, but it's never really going to go away.
Well, and that brings up a question. It, I think there's kind of a perception out there in certain religious circles that atheists are all judgmental and out to get religious people. So, what are your personal feelings on uh, the religions, the major religions, and the people who follow them?
Uh, Major religions and in regards to the idea that atheists are like out to get them, I think that's a huge media twist. Uh, you know, um, it's
There's people
really.
who, there's really people who think that, and I think it's a concern for them. So I just want to give an opportunity to kind of respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that there are militant atheists, just as there's militant Christians and militant Muslims, and
Sure.
um, you've got that with any school of thought, and basically most atheists are relatively peaceful when it comes to interactions with other religions, because part of the whole philosophy is that like uh, you you kind of believe what you want to, like you make
Yeah.
the choice about what you believe, and we operate on that fundamental morality that humans and even other animals have, is that we just want to do what we want to do, and we don't want other people telling us how to do it, so we're not going to tell other people how to do it. And
Yeah, I
sure,
guess.
some of us fall prey to getting a little preachy, but
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to draw the distinction between atheism and anti-theism. I think, because that's
Right.
kind of how I think some people perceive it. That there's this focus that atheists are out there to destroy religion and discredit it and things like that. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. No, yeah, the vast majority of atheists I know are not like that at all.
Yeah. Going back to something I said a few minutes ago, I think a lot of people are going to point to that and say, well, he thinks religion's not relevant anymore. He thinks it could go away at some point. Like, they're going to take that and think that, I've got this stance that religion might as well just, get it out. And like, that's a little different from like anti-theism, because I'm not like actively rallying against religion. All religion. There are
Mhm.
caveats. I will admit there are certain religions and or cults that really do bring harm to society, to people, uh, through their actions, through their beliefs. Um, and I go into detail about this in a book I wrote a few years ago. It was about my experience with cancer as an atheist,
Mhm.
uh, beating the odds without any gods. And
Yeah, hold
um,
that up, like hold it, yeah, and say something so it switches.
yeah, so basically, you can get this on Amazon. We'll put a link in there when this goes live. But I I speak on a more militant side of atheism in this book, because um, I'm trying to argue the point of why I am an atheist in this book. And in order to explain that, I've got to go into the um, some of the horrors that have occurred because of religion that have steered me away from that sort of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know I'm going on really long about this, but um, you really don't see a lot of people killing in the name of atheism. I don't. I would dare to say you don't see any of that.
No,
You do see plenty of people killing in the name of their God.
well,
And
that's true. Maybe not so much nowadays on the same scale, but it certainly has happened in the past. And I don't think anybody out there would deny that any doctrine has its shortcomings and could be abused. And certainly religion is one of those, because people get really fanatical, or they can get fanatical about it, and that can create some problems of its own. Um,
yeah, well, I mean, just 70 years ago, Hitler thought it was his Christian duty to do what he did.
sure, but the
He's
thing is, not all Christians would ally themselves with Hitler or his beliefs. So, I mean, I think there's certainly potential for harm, and that should be recognized. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and certainly not everyone who subscribes to that philosophy will automatically do the same evil things that one fanatic guy did, of course. And that applies both ways. Like, just because I don't know, Pol Pot or something was an atheist or whatever, it doesn't mean we're
Stalin.
all out there. Stalin, yeah, whatever. Doesn't mean we're out there killing people or raping and doing
Well,
whatever we want.
exactly. There definitely needs to be a separation between somebody's religious or spiritual beliefs and their insanity.
Right.
Because I think those are the ones that are kind of outliers. They stand out because they're so big, and it's very easy to point to those as a source of the problem. But I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask too, a ways back. I was thinking this, but because you had mentioned something kind of about your family, how did your friends and family react? I mean, I know your family was reacted negatively, or you felt some kind of pressure in that regard. But how about friends and other relatives?
um for the most part, friends were okay. coming from a religious family, well, here's the thing. I mentioned earlier that, middle school age or so, I started throwing around the word agnostic, and that wasn't met with, acceptance. Let's put it that way. Um, Basically, what that did, and I don't say this to belittle anyone else's struggle, but it's not unlike the stigmas that the LGBT crowd is kind of working their way out of now.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's very, very similar to going to your parents and saying I'm gay. When you go to them and say, hey, I'm an atheist, and they're very religious, it's usually not handled very well.
Yeah. Well, so have you told them about it?
I didn't really outright say it. Like I guess around the time that I really started identifying as an atheist was probably like 2002 or something. I don't think I actually brought it up to them until close to 10 years later. And I happen to have like a red A pin on my jacket, and my mom asked what it stood for, and my default is to not lie, and I said it stands for atheism.
Oh.
And that sparked a little bit of awkwardness. There was like, I used to hear from them pretty regularly, and for a short while I didn't get a lot of phone calls from them, but that all kind of evened out in time. My parents are absolutely great people, and I don't regret the way that they raised me at all. Like,
sure, I know your parents, and they're awesome.
Yeah, and they're they obviously never stopped loving me, and they accept me for who I am. It was just like an adjustment, and I understand that, but it was still like really rough for me, feeling like I had disappointed them or something.
Well, so did that pan out in the end? Did they finally accept the way that you feel about things, or is it still a source of contention?
We kind of just don't talk about it. That's just kind of where it landed. Here and there, sometimes my mom would, give me a book to read or something about like somebody who died and went to heaven and came back to life or whatever, and things like that.
Ooh, near-death experiences. We got to talk about that one.
Yeah, that would be a good show.
That would be great. I am fascinated with that subject.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about that, actually.
Yeah.
I even talk about it in my book.
Nice. Perfect.
But like it's for the most part, like I said, we just kind of don't talk about it, and that's probably okay. Like at least I wasn't disowned or anything like that.
That's good.
Plenty of people have had it worse than me, and for all intents and purposes, it went okay. It was just awkward.
Okay, well, that's better. Yeah, like you said, a lot of people have had it a lot worse. So they're not trying to convert you back to Catholicism or anything.
Not hard, not not hardcore. No.
Other than like the subtle, nuanced. Hey, I'm going to give you this book about near-death experiences, kind of thing.
Yeah, and there'll be like, she'll say prayers for me out loud and stuff like that, and I understand that that's well intentioned.
Yeah.
But what people probably don't always think about in that case, like if someone's an atheist, or if someone's practicing Islam, and you're like, hang on a second, I'm going to pray to Jesus for you, you're kind of disrespecting them. You're saying like, your belief doesn't really matter here, let me use mine and help you out. It's a little condescending.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
You know, like I mean, it doesn't really hurt anything. It's just, you know, it's a kind of like a social no that people kind of breeze over. They don't think about it, I think.
Sure. Well, let's see. I guess maybe we've been talking about this a while, and it's probably a good starter point for this. But I'd like you to summarize kind of your personal uh, philosophical doctrine or beliefs about atheism, maybe for the viewers. Just kind of explain yourself, um, so that people can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. So early on in the show, I mentioned that I consider myself a spiritual atheist, and that's just my particular take on it. But you know, to a lot of people, that's going to sound like, oh, well, you're basically just still religious, or you still believe in something, right? Well, not necessarily. I do believe that there is untapped potential within ourselves. And by that, I mean that, like, there are capabilities that stress can kind of trigger, and that's what I ultimately gained from my experience of cancer, is that, you know, I went through something really horrific, and I somehow rallied, and, you know, I surprised myself with how much I was able to actually put up with. And that right there just tells me that, like, there's more to us than meets the eye. But I don't think that it's an outside force. And I don't think that it's responsible for creating everything. I don't ascribe any of that supernatural stuff to it. It's just a spirituality. There's a great book by Sam Harris. I would implore everyone to read if they want to understand the idea of spiritual atheism, because he's an atheist and he's all about meditation and spirituality and all that stuff. It's hang on, I have it right over here.
All right.
It's called Waking Up.
All right.
The Guide to Spirituality Without Religion, or something like that. Maybe I'll throw a link in at the end.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do that.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a pretty easy read, and I think it really well explains, like, how I think of atheism.
So is that maybe I'm not sure if I'm like reading everything you're saying right, but does that mean you maybe believe that there some of the psychic powers that people believe in might possibly be true, or am I just assuming things?
No, I don't really like categorize that as spiritual necessarily. I think that's more supernatural.
Yeah,
If I
maybe.
were to define it as anything,
Okay.
like I much like religion, spirituality often goes hand in hand with that form of supernatural thinking, for sure. And I could see how it can, you know, be confused one way or the other. Just as often happens with spirituality and religion, people think they're kind of one and the same, and they're really
Yeah.
not. You know.
Okay. All right.
I mean, fundamentally, all I do is live my life as though there's no God, try to be a good person, and I think that I'm able to really kick ass if I need to. But
Yeah. Okay.
on your average every other day, I probably can't.
Well, yeah, that's a great. That's a pretty good summary. I think I really really enjoyed this interview. I think that was very interesting, and hopefully viewers get something out of it. You know, keep questions and comments coming. Um, we'll certainly go into other religions, or philosophies in the spiritual realm, because it's super, super interesting. So yeah.
We'd love to hear from people of all faiths. If you want to come on the show and talk about what you believe, like that would be really interesting, I think.
Yeah, tell us your story, and we'll certainly listen and ask questions in a very non-judgmental way. Thanks for deep sink diving into religion with microscopy.
Or the lack thereof.
Yep.